Well, good morning, and thank you so very much for the opportunity to stand before you today. I know as we sit here every Sunday, we come with all these things in our minds and all the things we have to do after church, and I just want to ask us for the next little bit just to clear our minds of all those responsibilities, all those things, because as Christians, it's one of our number one responsibility to grow spiritually in the Lord, and that's what today is all about. And to open your hearts and open your minds as to what the Lord would use me to share with you guys. I'm a teacher by trade. I have been a high school teacher for 30 years, and I recently have retired, and now I get the opportunity to keep my two grandbabies. So I am living life to its fullest. I'm tireder than I've ever been because they are only 12 months apart. And so they keep me very, very busy, but they're all at our church today, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here. So as we reset our minds, there's one thing I'm just gonna show you this. So as you look at this, what is the first thing that you notice? A black dot, right? Almost every time I would ever say this to my students, and I help with the youth at my church, that's the response that you get. You automatically see the black dot. And that's the way life is for many of us, because what you focus on is what you're going to see. And immediately we all focused on the obvious on this white piece of paper, which was the big black dot. And for me and for you, what I want us to think about today is this big black dot represents all your worries, all your failures, all the things in life that just keep you pent up, keep you asking questions. And many of us have had a lot of black dots. We probably should have a lot of, more like a Dalmatian on the page, right? If every dot represented the struggles and the trials that we've had in life. But what I want us to focus on today, and I'll use two scriptures a little later, is all the white space. Because in that white space is where Jesus is. And often we don't see him because we're not looking for him. We look at the obvious. We look at all the things that just grip us. And so today, let's look at the white space. Let's recenter and refocus. And I'm going to share with you my testimony, my sanctification journey. I became a Christian at 12 years of age in a church that looks a lot like this. Oh, wow. It brings back a lot of memories just being in your building today. Beautiful, by the way. I became a Christian, but we all know that in your Christian journey, it is a sanctification journey, right? There's a process. And what I've learned in my 55 years of being on this earth is being a Christian, it's not a destination, it is a journey. And every day has its challenges. And I stand before you as one who has had many challenges that many of us don't ever want to have to face. But the choice isn't, as we look at this, the choice isn't about, is God there? Is God in the midst of my trials and my struggles? He's there. It's just whether or not you choose to see him in all the little things. Do you choose to see him in the things that you do every single day? And I've often wondered, you remember those Where's Waldo books? I remember going to the doctor's office, and that was back when you could sit in the doctor's office. My doctor, if you're sick, you sit over to the side and they call you to come in. You only get to come in the front door as if you're coming for a regular routine checkup. But I remember as a kid those Where's Waldo books. And as I've gone through life, sometimes it's almost like God is like a Where's Waldo. Like, where is he? And you search on every page, you look around, and you don't recognize him, you don't see him. And sometimes you just have to look a little more intently. Sometimes it's all the little smiles that you have. For me, going to, in 30 years of teaching, you'd have a really bad day, and then there would be this one kid who would come up and who would just say something to you. I remember one day I had a student who came up and said, Miss D, that's what all the kids called me, because Dellinger's a very common name in Lincoln County. And so we had 4 Miss Dellingers at my school. So I was Miss D, and he's like, can I talk to you after class? I was like, absolutely. And so it was fourth period. It was the end of the day. And I said, sure, what's going on? And he said, I know that you're a Christian by the way that you carry yourself. And he said, I just want to ask you if you'll pray for me. And I said, well, of course, absolutely. Can I ask what's going on? And this young man had been diagnosed with cancer. And he was fearful. He was very, very afraid. And right then and there, in the halls of the school, of a public school, I said, you know what? I'm going to continue to pray for you, but we're going to pray right here in the halls of this school. And so I want you to know there are Christian teachers out there who do those kinds of things. People, you know, I've always asked God to put a hedge of protection around me, to do his will and do it in the way that he sees fit. And I said, if you will protect me, I promise to serve you always. And so that day in that hallway, I prayed with him. He's now married with a young child, actually just had their second baby, and Landon is doing beautifully. But it's those types of things in life where you say, Lord, you know, my day was really bad, but you just showed me that you're still in it, that you're still there. And so I want to reference a biblical reference in Genesis 28, because I'm going to lead you into my story with my son Ethan. In Genesis 28, 15 through 17 is where I'm going to read, but I want to give you some premise behind what's happened here. What you've had is, we all know Jacob and Esau, and Jacob was fleeing Esau. He was a little shady in his dealings with his brother, and so his father's like, hey, you need to flee, and I need you to go to Haran, and I need you to see, you're going to go find a wife. That was his ultimate destination. So that's the premise of where we're at in the story when we come to the scripture. And he says to him, well, let me give you a little bit more context. So Jacob has been traveling, and he's tired, and he lays down to sleep on his journey. And so in verse 15, it says, behold, I am with you. This is the Lord. He's having this dream. And in this dream, when he lays his head on this rock, in this dream, he sees a ladder. And on that ladder, there's angels ascending and descending down the ladder. And these are the words that he hears in his dream. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. This is the Lord speaking. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've spoken to you. Because he had promised him that this was going to be his land. This is what you're going to inherit. You're going to have to flee, but I promise you, I'm not leaving you because you're fleeing. And then Jacob awoke, and this is his response. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it. And he was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. You see, that was a pivotal moment in Jacob's life, where Jacob realized God's omnipresence, that God is everywhere. He's there always in everything. And in that moment, even though his circumstances were desperate, he realized that God was everywhere all the time for all people. And so for me, I had a very similar circumstance in that. And what I saw with Jacob, and I remembered this story, is Jacob went from having fear to where he was in awe, in reverence of the Lord. He was running from his mistake that he had made, but in that mistake, the Lord came to him. Well, the Lord came to me, and honestly, it was in a dream very similar to this. You see, January of 2019, my family, well, we got the worst news we could ever imagine. Our son, Ethan, 22 years old, diesel mechanic, he was under a truck at his job, and there was a tragic accident. And for him, my husband was a first responder, and so he heard this call over his walkie-talkie that there had been an accident, and it described it. And so immediately he called Ethan's place of work, and there was no answer. And so he finally kept calling, and they were like, Mr. Dellinger, well, they called him Jimmy because they knew him firsthand, because my husband's family puts in septic tanks. And so this was the place that makes the septic tanks where Ethan was working, and he was their mechanic for their trucks. And he said, you need to meet us at the hospital. And so Ethan had gotten trapped under that. It was a cement truck, and the brakes had frozen, and he was under there trying to do that, and he had left a tool. He had finished the job. He forgot a tool, and between the time that he remembered the tool, the guy had cranked up the truck. and Ethan's collar on his jacket got caught up in the axle, whatever. I don't know vehicles, but he got choked out. And so, being a biology teacher, an anatomy teacher, my husband being a first responder, we knew that 30 minutes he had gone without oxygen because nobody saw him under that truck. And when they did see him, so he was unconscious. They took him to the hospital. Long story short, over 4 days at CMC, when we got there, Jimmy and I realized that it didn't look very good for Ethan. Short of a miracle from the Lord, and that is truly what it would have to be, our son was not going to come home to us, the son that he left it was Martin Luther King Day. I will never forget it. I was off of work, and I remember just praying out to the Lord. I said, Lord, please heal his body like we all do, right? Please heal his body. Bring him home to us. And that night, that Monday night, when I lay down, it was early in the morning. They gave us this little room off to the side, and they they basically said to us, "This is your place." And so many people had come to the hospital, and I just needed some time alone. I needed time to process this. That I didn't have time to be out there. You know how people, you have to shake their, I just needed time to like wrap my head around where we were in this. I just said goodbye to my son this morning. He went to work, and by 9:30 that morning, like our world just turned upside down. And so I remember in that little room, and I dozed off for a little bit, and I fell asleep praying, and I was like, Lord, please, please, please heal him. Please, you have the power. I know that you do, but I'm asking you, if you do not give me my heart's desire, please prepare me to deal with your answer. Because I knew where I had been 20 years prior. See, 20 years prior, I'd lost my mom. My mom was 47 years old. I was in my 20s. My mom died of AML, was diagnosed, and 30 days later, she passed away. And so I remember that first big tragedy in my life and where it left me. I was in my 20s, but I was still on my sanctification journey, right? And so I got really, really angry with God during that time. And there was, in my sanctification process, I battled some severe depression, some severe anxiety, some things that came up in my life. And God, through his grace and his mercy, He rescued me. He rescued me from that dark, dark place that I was at. So that night in the hospital room, I said, Lord, I can't go back there. I can't go back to that dark place that I used to live in. You took me from that. And I'm asking you now that you go before me and that you prepare me for whatever answer you're about to give. Because I know you got me through it before, and you're going to get me through it again. And so as I fell asleep with that prayer, it was like I was Jacob, and I felt like I was in a dream, and I heard an audible voice in that dream. And in that dream, the Lord was like, I hear you, Melissa. I hear your prayers. But the answer I'm giving you is you're not going to bring Ethan home. I'm bringing him home to me. So as you think about heaven, when we have loved ones that are there, that is a glorious place. That's why we're here. That's why we serve the Lord. It's do what we can do for him in our time on earth, but this is not it. This is not why he created us. He created us to worship him while here, but ultimately at the end of the day, our creation was made to be with him. And I said, Lord, okay, heaven it is. But I really just ask that you hold my hand through this. Because I knew Ethan's wishes. Ethan and I, when he was 16 years old, we had this long discussion. He said, Mom, he talked to me about organ donation. And he said he came home, and after we had talked about it, and he's like, he said, I've heard you and Dad before, and my husband was not an organ donor. He had for whatever reason with his family, he just had a negative experience or a negative feeling about it. And so he's like, can you, talk me through from a biology standpoint, as an anatomy teacher, whatever. So we had that conversation when he was 16. And I said, you know what? I choose to be a donor, and I shared with him why. And he came back after we got his license, and his dad took him, and he said, I got the red heart on my license, Mom. And he winked at me. And I said, okay. And knowing that his dad, it was kind of like, I don't know, it wasn't a secret, but he knew that his dad did not and that I did, and he just, he had worked through that. And then when Ethan, he joined the National Guard at 17 as a senior in high school. And so for every 1 weekend a month during his entire senior year of high school, he went to training. He went to his National Guard training, just like I passed when I came down here. That's where he went, except he didn't go here to Lincoln. And we had that conversation again before he went off to basic training. He's like, Mom, I know we're not in war, but just remember, if anything should ever happen to me, I'm a donor. And in the middle of that, we had lost this sweet, precious 8-year-old boy in our church to cancer when Ethan was about 15. And so he had his sanctification journey kind of took a pause. And I could notice, and I knew, and I recognized his journey because it was very similar to what mine had been when I lost my mom and all those emotions. And so I walked him through it. How is it that we can still find joy and happiness when we have so much sorrow in our hearts? And so he and I walked this journey with some difficult times. Raising teenagers, it's just hard sometimes. And then when you're a teenager who's got a chip on your shoulder because this little 8-year-old who's like your brother has taken away from you, it seemed like our family had just been filled with so much sadness and so much sorrow. But what I know now is that when I lost my mom the way that I did and the deep valleys that I was in, that was part of my sanctification journey, and that prepared me for the biggest test of my faith on January the 19th, or January the 20th, 2019. And so the Lord said to me, I said, if you can't change the situation, change me. Help me. Prepare me to deal with this. And so, have you ever heard of something called the frequency illusion? You wouldn't because you're not a science geek like me. But anyway, the frequency illusion is this idea that what you're looking for is what you're going to find. And I'll just give you an example. We do it subconsciously, but we don't realize it. So, vehicles, for example. I remember years ago, my husband bought this used, he thought it'd be fun. He bought this used Jeep Wrangler from a kid down the street, right? It was fun, but I'd never driven one of those, and I'm like, okay. So my girls start telling me, I have 2 daughters, and I'm like, I just all of a sudden noticed these people that drive Jeep Wranglers are waving at me. And they're like, Mom, and so they told me that there's this they jokingly said, well, it's kind of like a cult. I was like, what? And they're like, no. Anybody who drives a Jeep, there's this thing. And so I looked it up, and so there's waves. Depending on what kind of Jeep you drive, there's a certain wave. Some of it's a 5-finger wave. Some of it's a peace sign. I'm like, who knew? So all of a sudden, I never noticed Jeep Wranglers on the road. Never. I never had seen them. But all of a sudden, everywhere I drive, I notice them, and every one of them waves. That's frequency illusion. So now all of a sudden when I don't drive that Jeep Wrangler anymore. It's for sale, by the way. But anyway, so now that I drive down the road, I notice every Jeep Wrangler on the road because that's what I'm looking for. Got it? What you look for is what you're going to see. And that is so similar in our faith, guys. If you're looking for Jesus, you're going to see him. You're going to see him in his people. You're going to see him in the smallest things, from a kid coming up to you and saying something to you, to a smile from a total stranger, to being in the McDonald's drive-thru and you get up there to pay and somebody's like, hey, it's already paid for. Just little things that people do, you're just I call them God winks. When we're in our darkest place and we just need to see the Lord. We just need to see a glimmer of his goodness and his kindness. He shows up in his people. He does. That's why you come to church every Sunday, right? It's just to feel the goodness of his people and to reassure yourself that, you know what, I can do it tomorrow. I can do the next day. I can just keep my one foot in front of the other. But those out here that are struggling, as Miss Gina had just mentioned, I remember how I still remember, I still feel the loss of my mom and of Ethan, but don't stop remembering the good things, and don't stop thanking the Lord for the times that you did have. You can't stop that, because then Satan wins. If you let Satan steal your joy, he wins, because he robs you of this opportunity for all of God that's all around you and all the little things. And as I look at this, you know, I think where I'm going with that is life can be a bunch of what ifs, right? What if this had happened? What if this hadn't happened? What if I had done this? What if I'd done that? And I've kind of gone through this conversation a lot with my Zoe, my youngest one, who is in college. And she's like, well, what if I do this? And what if I do that? And she's so focused on the black dots. Because, of course, you know, I don't want to mess up. You know, what if I take this job? You know, what if I get all of those things? And with what ifs in life comes anxiety, comes just this, you have zero control. And for me as a mom, trying to explain to her, listen, all I'm telling you to do is pray to the Lord and ask for his wisdom, and he will clear it up. He will give you the clarity in which you seek if you ask. Stop trying to do this all by yourself. And so, what I want us to do when we walk out of here today, because the title of this for me, and this is kind of where I came to, is move it away from the what ifs of life to the what now. And the what now is all the white space. All the stuff that we don't see that God's doing behind the scenes that we have no clue if all we do. So it's the frequency illusion, right? If you want to see the problem, you're going to see the problem. Could be somebody at work that gets on your nerves. Could be a kid in class that just, right? I could give you multiple examples of what ifs in life. We all have them. But then when we step back and we say, Lord, what now? And so we go through the process with Ethan, and when I realized that there was only a small portion of his brain that was still, that was still alive, because he had gone for 30 minutes without oxygen. And so Jimmy and I knew. And so after that dream, after that clarity that I got from the Lord, it was my turn to finally have this difficult conversation with my husband, who wasn't so keen on organ donation as I. And I told him, I said, honey, you're a first responder. You know the science behind this. And so we had that hard conversation, and I said, and you remember that conversation we had in the kitchen where Ethan said he wanted to be a donor if it was possible. He said, I do. He said, the Lord won't let me forget it. And I said, we got some hard decisions that we're going to have to make. And so we as a family, we initiated that conversations with the doctors, because it was a what now moment for me. It was the white space. It wasn't focusing on the bad. It was focusing on honoring our son the way that he wanted to be honored. And I always knew Ethan, you know, he was a hunter. He duck hunted, so you'd be out on a boat. And he lived life to the fullest, climbing up in trees. He was accident prone too, right? So I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if maybe he thought in his own mind that, you know, I don't know that I'm going to live to be old. There's just something about his soul that he lived every minute of every day to its fullest, because he knew he wasn't going to get a life of 80 years. So we initiated that conversation, and we go through the process. And in essence, Ethan was on life support. His body had lost the inability to breathe for himself. And there was no going to bring that back. So we had to decide, and we did. We made the decision that this was what we were going to do. And on that Thursday, 4 days after his accident, I told the family, I said at 11:45, I asked the Lord, I said, please let us usher him into heaven. So our family, our immediate family, even my atheist sister, you see, we grew up with a deacon daddy in a Christian home. But when our mom died, she focused so much on the dark spot that she turned her back. And she is raising her 2 children as atheists. I chose for the what now. Took me a while. But I was not going to let Satan win. I'm just telling you, ladies who've lost your husbands, don't let Satan win. He wants nothing more than to steal your joy. And I see my sister live a life with no joy. It's just empty. It's just hollow. And my niece and nephew, so I tell you all that to make you understand the next part. But I need to read about Paul. Okay, forgive me for I have a huge burden for my sister. I love her with everything. She's running from God just like Jacob did, right? I keep praying, Lord, give her that dream. Give her that ladder moment. Let her see the angels. And I'm not going to stop praying that. My daddy's not stopping praying that. But she's run from the Lord so much that she moved her entire family to England. Her husband's got dual citizenship. Anyway, yeah, so they live across the big pond. So now I'm like, Lord, where's my influence going to be with my niece and nephew now? Like, how can, so pray for me for that. That God just opened some. I know I want to look in the white space, right? Give me some way that I'm going to be able to reach them and to be able to share the Lord. But Paul, so I want to give you a New Testament scripture that where I saw Paul, he looked past the mundane things. And that scripture is 2 Corinthians 4:17 through 18. It says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us as far more exceeding an eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things that are not seen. For the things which are seen are only temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. You see, if we just focus on the yuck of life, the things that we see, the craziness, like, I got to stop watching Fox News. Like, I got to stop, but I'm addicted, okay? It is just, I just, in my retirement with my grandbabies, past Rachel and Paw Patrol, when they're napping, I'm tuned into the world. Because why? Because these 2 babies, I want there to be a world where they can freely do this every single Sunday, Sunday night, where they can praise and worship the Lord. Oh, I can't get off on that tangent because I'll have a squirrel moment there, so let's just not. But what we got to do is we've got to see and think beyond what is right in front of our faces. And you see, when I prayed to the Lord and I said, I need you to help me to be able to, I can't change the situation, so you're going to have to change me to deal with it, right? That has kind of become my mantra. My prayer is, Lord, if you can't change the situation, change me. Change me to where I can deal with this person. I can deal with this circumstance. I can deal with whatever. You fill in the blank for whatever that might be in your life. But what I see here with Paul's situation is it's kind of like the visible and the invisible forces of life. As a kid, I always felt like, and as I teach youth and talk with little kids, I'm like, have you ever felt like the devil's on one shoulder, talking in your ear, and then there's the Lord is on the other shoulder talking, and they're duking it out, and you're in the middle. You ever felt like that in your faith? Boy, I have. Because I teach kids, so I just try to make things in a visual. And this was a time, and I think Paul was there, where you've got the invisible forces of the Lord. Of course, you also have the invisible forces of Satan that's out there too, like just really just trying to grab a hold of our kids today and take their spirits from them. But that black dot is what we see. The white space is what we don't see. And Paul realized, as did Jacob, there's purpose in your pain. There's purpose in my pain. And that pain that I felt for Mom was a refining process. It was a process by which my sanctification journey started happening. And it was already happening, but I was an adult at this point, and so now I began to realize, and I began to look back, and I see, now that I'm where I'm at now at 55 years old, I look back and I say, I would not have been able to handle Ethan's accident with the grace that I did had it not been for my mom's death. I'd already been there. I had already conquered that giant. I'd already let the Lord slay the devil. Physically, I felt like it was every day in that dark depression and medication and therapy. It was there. And you know what, during all of it, and I want you, church, to understand this. The whole while where I was suffering that, I was still standing up teaching Sunday school every Sunday. I was still in the church pew, and nobody knew. My struggle was deep down. It was internal, but my husband knew. Because the battle, you can't hide it from the people who love you most. So those in here that are struggling, don't hide it. There is no need to hide it. Be real. Be real and be open and let your people understand. And I wish I'd understood that before. But you see, when my mom passed away, I had a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. And so I was just trying to be everything for everybody. I was teaching, I was being a wife, and I was taking care of my daddy, who was at my house for 2 years straight every evening for dinner, because I had to be his support. Because when Mom died, Laura, my sister, moved away. So I was trying to be we don't have to be everything for everybody. We do not. And we've all felt that before. Because some of you might be sitting here today feeling that, because you've got A, B, C, D, all the things in your to-do list to do this week, today, whatever that might be. But in that moment, just like with Paul and where he was at when he was speaking to the Corinthian church, God gave me my second command. And so when we gathered around Ethan's bed, we prayed. We all prayed, and my dear friends that lead our praise and worship at church, we came together, and we all sang Amazing Grace. And when we finished with that, my daddy said the sweetest prayer over his oldest grandchild, because it was our way to say goodbye. The doctor walks to the door, and we see him and his army, because they were running some more tests. And during that time span where we were in there, Ethan gave up the spirit on his own. And they pronounced him dead. And then they took him, and he was able to do just that. He was able to give some of his organs away. And I said, Lord, I did what you asked. So I'm not done. I got another task for you. Oh, you do? Okay. And it was at that moment he said, you need to speak at his celebration of life service. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And that only lasted for about 30 seconds, because then I was reminded of all the valleys he had brought me through. And what God commands, he holds your hand. And I said, okay. Don't know how to do it, but I know you do. And so that's exactly what I prepared for on January the 28th, is I stood before a huge crowd of people. Because you see, I told the Lord, I said, there's some of Ethan's friends who don't know you. They spend many hours at our house, and they would call me Mama D, and they were kids from broken homes. They were kids who had little stability in their life, but he just seemed to be a magnet for dysfunctional. He was. He had a way of loving people where they were. He taught me a lot about that. He taught me a lot about, Mom, you just got to love people where they are and let God do the rest. I got some friends who need to see Jesus, and so that's kind of how we did it as a family. We just brought them in, and we just made them feel welcome. But I knew that many of his friends needed to know Jesus that day. But more than anything, the Lord said to me, the reason I'm giving you this command is because your sister, you need to plant a seed. And you see, his celebration of life was the only time my niece and nephew have ever sat in a pew at church. And in the darkest day of my life, he gave me an assignment to sow a seed in 2 children because their parents weren't doing it. I am thankful that I listened to his voice, because all the blessings that have flowed since then, all the white space that I would have never seen had I said no. Had I said no. That we're not going to honor his wishes, that I'm not going to speak at his funeral. I'm just going to be mad. I'm going to be mad like I was with my mom. But I couldn't do that because I saw him save my marriage. I saw him save my children. I saw him pull me out of depression and anxiety. I saw all the things. I stopped and paused to see all the goodness of God. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you ask me to do. 2 of Ethan's friends have called me, and they're in church. They've professed their faith. They got saved as a result of losing him. There is one of his friends that sits beside of me every Sunday in church. He comes. And when he lost Ethan, he really, really had a hard time. He struggled in a big way. He found his way back. And I remember when he found his way back home, he called and said, I'm coming to church today. And he faithfully every Sunday, because he's from a broken home with 2 parents who are not Christians and are not believers, he faithfully sits and he serves the Lord. That's why I miss not being at church today. My baby's home from college, but Gage is sitting there. And I said, Lord, thank you for the white spaces. Thank you for allowing me to see the goodness in tragedy that can come. His friends have been saved. They're back in church. Not all of them. I'm still fervently praying for many of them. I definitely am. But as a result of losing him and realizing I can be bitter, or I can praise the Lord in the storm. Because ultimately, as Christians, what my daddy has always said to me, he's like, Sissy, that's what he calls me, Sissy, we live on promises, not explanations. As Christians, we live on God's promises, not his explanations. Because I do not know, we do not know why God does what he does and why things happen in our life. And I just said, Lord, can you please, I'm going to ask you one more thing. Because God asked us to come to him with our heart, right? I know that I'm not going to get everything I ask for, but I'm going to ask it. And if he decides to be gracious enough to honor that, then I'm not going to stop serving him. But I said to him, okay, Lord, can I ask a favor? I knew the process when it came to organ donation, that within a year, after a year's time, that you could write a letter. They give you a whole packet on it, and they explain this process, that you could write a letter to the donors, right? You do not know their names. you write it and they give you an address. You mail it into LifeShare, the organization, and then LifeShare gets it to those families. But it tells you things you cannot do, right? No last names, you got these list of rules or whatever. And they, of course, read the letter, and I'm sure they probably, black out anything that you do that couldn't be in there. So I wrote a letter, and as I did, I wrote 3 of them because I knew that there were 3 young people. They had told us in a letter about 3 months after Ethan's passing that there was a 13-year-old girl who had received his liver, a 30-year-old young father who had received a kidney, and a 24-year-old girl who had received a kidney and his pancreas. And then, of course, other things, but they do not give names or anything. And when I got that letter, I sat and wept because Zoe, his little sister, was 12 when he passed. And to know that he gave 3 young people a second chance of life, that he was their hero, knowing how much he had loved little Robbie, the little boy at our church who had had cancer, and how much he had just poured into all the little kids at church. I mean, he was the kid. He had 20 little cousins. He was number 10 grandchild of 12. Dellingers, they just have lots of babies. And he made little wooden rocking horses in his carpentry class at Maiden High School for these little nieces and nephews. And he loved kids. And so I said, Lord, I want to mail these letters. And if it's in your will, can I just hear from one of them? I think that would be really cool, but I'm just asking you that from a mama's heart. It was not something that my husband or my daughters felt led to do, but for me, I felt like it was part of my healing. It was part of my journey. And so I mailed those letters February because we had lost Ethan in January. Well, his 2 weeks after his passing was his birthday. He would have been 23. February the 3rd, we just would have celebrated his 30th birthday. And I said, if it's your will, could you have some sort of correspondence, a letter back, something? I just really wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like, but that's what I asked for. I put my hands on them, I prayed over them, and I took them to the post office. And the beauty of that is God is so good. I wrote that letter in February, and on March the 13th, you remember March the 13th, 2020? The world shut down, called COVID. The dark day. Well, on March the 13th, my phone dinged at about 8:30 that night, and I looked down, and it says, Amy Nance has sent you a message on Facebook Messenger. I was like, Amy Nance wants to be your friend. And I said, well, I have no idea who this is. Let's see what this is about. Me clicking on that and responding to that message opened up a friendship that I never knew I needed. You see, Amy Nance is the woman in that picture that you see with me right there in that golf cart. She is the mama of Ashton Nance Stutz, and she was the young lady who got Ethan's pancreas and kidney. When I wrote that letter, I followed the rules, but I'm 30 years into teaching. I know the tricks. I said just enough in there, and I had lived enough life, and Ethan's accident was very publicized for whatever reason it was. And so I knew what I could say and enough to say that if they wanted to find me with the way the world is with social media, they could find me. And she did. She did, and a beautiful relationship has evolved out of that. Now, her daughter, Ashton, did not respond right away. In fact, it took her 2 years before she ever had the courage to message back. I even went back and looked. Her mom texted me in March, messaged me in March of 2020, and Ashton's first text was March of 2022. And I even printed out what she had wrote. I went back and I looked at it. And her journey was tough too. But as a result of that, let me tell you how God works. One of the things we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to honor Ethan's memory and his love for kids. And so our family decided that year in 2019 when we lost him that we were going to establish a scholarship in his memory. He started out at North Lincoln, hated it there. He wanted, of course, he had an interest in military, and he had an interest in mechanics and also carpentry. And so we transferred him to Maiden, which is just the same distance from our house as North Lincoln High School was, and he finished his last 2 years there. But they had carpentry, automotives, and ROTC. Or there you go. And so he went there. And we established a scholarship for both of those schools. And he was so community service minded that it's focused around and centered around kids who give to other people, who are gracious, who volunteer and do all these things. And so we just launched. We've done it since 2019. And in the 7 years that we've had the scholarship, we have given over $90,000. The Lord has allowed our everything to be blessed. And that's who I want to give the praise to today. It's nothing that I've done. It's just I was obedient. I did what the Lord commanded. And as a result, He is blessing other people, other young people, still to this day, in Ethan's name and in God's name. And I get the opportunity when I go to those schools to present the scholarship to share my faith and to share Ethan's faith. At that celebration of life, it gave me the opportunity to tell his friends, if you ever want to see Ethan again, you have to know Jesus, because Ethan knew Jesus. So who knew that the death of my firstborn child was going to be a platform for me to share the gospel? Probably more than I ever did as a Sunday school teacher. Because in that platform, I was able to share with non-believers, people who didn't know. We come to church, and we come because we love Jesus, right? But everybody that I encounter and have encountered since, they don't even know Jesus. And it's just about planting those seeds so others can come to know Him and go to that place you guys sang about, heaven, and sing those glorious praises. I retired in January 1st of 2023, and I got to tell you the biggest God wink. There's a lot of them, but I want to tell you something that was really, really cool, because God was just like, look, I'm still on the throne. Look what I did. So in my retirement, my husband, we just don't travel. We have a farm. He has his own business. We just don't really. So anyway, he got me a cruise. We went on a cruise for my retirement, right? And so by this time, Ashton and I don't know, did I send you? I don't know if you got a picture of her, but Ashton's about this tall. She's a little bitty thing. And she had posted some things on social media that she was going on something, I don't remember what it was, on a cruise. And I just kind of was like, we had not really conversed, very small, and I was like, okay. So I messaged her. I'm like, oh, I see you guys you're going on a cruise. Of course, she had been so sick for so long. She was diagnosed with diabetes at 6, and so she went into organ failure, and really, it was very, very dismal for her at that point. And with serve this up on a platter with a big cherry on top. Like, I'm going on a cool vacation with my husband, and I meet this precious child and her husband, and instantly Jimmy looked at me and he said, he's not a talker like me. He said, wow, God's good. And he told her that night when he hugged her on that cruise, he said, none of this is coincidental. God doesn't work on coincidences. None of what happens is coincidental. He said, Ethan would have chose you. Meeting her husband, Ethan and him would have been like, they are like clones of one another. They're so very similar. And since then, she and her mom, Amy, and her husband, they come to our golf tournaments and they help us every single year. But what is so really cool about all of this is my girls, who were very, like, I'm not ready for that, Mom. I didn't realize at the time until about a month ago. Writing that letter was a healing part for me, but meeting Ashton and Tyler was a healing part for my husband and my girls. Because you see, my girls text Ashton like a friend. They text her on their own, and they talk to each other. And my husband said something about, well, call Ashton and Tyler, and they go to to South Carolina football games, where Zoe goes to school. She's a Gamecock. And so they go with us to the ball games. It is just a beautiful thing. Far more than I could ever. Now, I know everybody's journey in organ donation that's not really my focus for today. It's just God uses a path that you and I cannot fathom to bring you to people and to bring you to a place in your journey. And now that I'm here and I look back, I can't explain it to anything, but that was God. That was Him. And that's the white space, guys. That's not focusing on the darkness. Yes, I'm not going to lie. December and January is hard in my house. It's Christmas, and it just never gets easier. It's Christmas, His death, then His birthday, all within 8 weeks of each other. So it's an emotional roller coaster, but I don't stay there. You can't stay in the dark places of life. You have to remind yourself that there is a God that's bigger than any of your problems. And He wants you. You just have to look for Him. You have to reach out and you have to ask, okay, I don't want to be a what if Christian. I want to be a what now Christian. And that is my testimony in a nutshell, is how we can progress from being a what if Christian and living our life of doubts and what if this had not happened, what if that had happened, to a Lord, what now? Because you can still use me whether I'm broken, whether I have done A, B, C, D, and all these things, and that's the journey that I've gone through with some of Ethan's friends, is God does not care where you were. He cares where you are now. And just like you shared with the offering, it's all about your heart and your giving. And where is your heart? So I just want to leave you guys with A, thank you, and B, just always remember that as Christians, we live on God's promises, not His explanations. Don't ever forget the promises of God and what He has given us, because I promise you, no matter the trial, no matter the dark spots that you're in life, He will bring you through them if you let Him. Can I close in prayer? Dear Lord, I just thank You for who You are. I thank You for Your goodness. I thank You for Your mercy. I thank You for Your grace. There's so many things in life we just take for granted, that we just think that we've done things of our own free will. But in the sanctification journey that I've gone through, Lord, You've made me realize that You're in every bit of it. You were there with Jacob in the dream. You were there with Paul. You made them realize that we can't do anything in life without You. We try, and we do a miserable job, Lord. And I just thank You for my sanctification journey. The times have been hard, but Lord, I've never turned away. I've been angry and I've questioned You, Lord, but You have shown me that You are there holding my hand every step of the way. And I know there's people in this congregation that are hurting, that are working through problems and situations, or their own personal deaths in their family, whatever the situation may be, Lord. I just pray that today, through some of these words, that we just come back to the realization that we are not in this journey alone, that you are by our side, and so are all of our fellow Christians that sit here with us. Help us, Lord, as Christians that are going through life and things are great, that we just prick our hearts, prick our minds to be more cognizant of those that are hurting around us. Help us to be more aware. Send a card, do a call, whatever it might be, because there are people who are hurting and they need that continuous reminder every single day to live on your promises and not on the circumstance, Lord. Open our eyes and help us to see you in all the beautiful spaces and all the things that we don't see. Recognize and love you regardless of what it is that we're in. I thank you. I thank you for where you've brought me from, and I thank you for all the things that you're going to do with me, through me, and every single person in this room, Lord. Just help us to have a willing heart to serve you. Be open, be honest, and be real. And Lord, we love you. Amen.